Hello, and welcome to the 2023 Right Hive Guest of Honor panel for Zoraida Córdova. Zoraida is the acclaimed author of more than 24 novels and short stories, including the Brooklyn Brujas series, Star Wars: The High Republic Convergence, and The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. In addition to writing novels, she serves on the board of We Need Diverse Books and is the co-editor of the best-selling anthology Vampires Never Get Old, as well as the co-host of the writing podcast Deadline City. She writes romance novels as Zoe Castile. Zoraida was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and calls New York City home. When she's not working, she's roaming the world in search of magical stories. Zoraida, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I have a few questions for you today, but I wanted to make a note for everyone who's watching at our conference. If you would like to ask Zoraida questions, please post them in our Discord and we'll make sure that she answers them for you. So Zoraida, what first inspired you to start writing? Like, what is your origin story?
Well, I started writing when I was 13 years old. I feel like if you've listened to me talk about writing, you've probably already heard this story, but for all the new people, when I was 13, we got an assignment to write an extra credit 3-page short story. I didn't have a computer, but my friend did. So I went over to her house and started writing. And it was midnight by the time I finished, and I had 21 pages. And her mom was like, "You're still up." And I'm like, "Well, it's not finished." So clearly a little glimpse into the future of my one, procrastination, and two, very long or longer stories. And so I wrote this short story. It was called Final Heartbreak, after the Jessica Simpson song. And it was a very thinly veiled reimagining of the breakup of two of my best friends. And obviously they didn't talk to me after I had to, share this story with the class. Um, but I learned a lot of rules about using people as inspiration. And so even though it was a contemporary short story, also my teacher only gave me a check plus, and everybody got a check plus. So I feel like I had 21 pages compared to everyone's 2 to 3 pages. I feel like I was robbed. I could email that teacher if she's still alive. I am old. But yeah, so that's sort of where my curiosity about stories started. And I found a love for reading when I was 13 at the same. So all of it happened at the same time, right? And I started reading. I hated books. I hated reading because teachers would always like shove the house on Mango Street at me and was like, "This is you." And I'm like, "It's not. I don't relate to this at all." And so, surely it's an important book, but it just wasn't what I wanted to read. I wanted to read fantasy. I wanted to read magic. I wanted to read about people going through, portals and looking glasses and giant armors. And so that's sort of where I've discovered the young adult fantasy genre. And I picked up a book called In the Forests of the Night by Amelia Atwater Rhodes. And it was because the author was 14 years old and she got her first book deal when she was 13 from Delacorte, a division of Random House. And seeing that somebody my age, we have nothing in common, but other than being teenage kids in America, right? I was like, "Oh, you don't have to be of a certain age to get published." And so I made it my mission to 10 years later, I got my first book deal.
That's amazing. I love that story. So what type of stories do you enjoy writing the most? Because you have quite a selection.
I do. I've written I want to say 21 books, or maybe 20. I've lost track of time. I've lost track of them. All of my children have been unwieldy. So I've written about 20 books, almost as many short stories. I've edited anthologies. I've written novellas under pen names. And I think that I feel most myself when I'm writing messy women. And that is like, even even in fantasy, I've written contemporary romance. When I write about women that are complicated and very emotionally open fuckboys, can I curse?
Yeah,
Fine.
absolutely.
I think that like it isn't as much as about genre as it is about archetype for me. And so
Mm,
when for me, archetypes are really important, and that's what makes a story uh come alive and something that I become obsessed with, right? There's a stage in the writing process that is obsession. And
mm.
that's the moment that I know, oh, I'm in here. I can keep writing. I want this story. I need to tell it. And so, I love fantasy. I love making up religions for fantastical worlds. I love writing two people falling in love in the middle of a Starbucks, whatever. But as long as I can dig into the archetype, those are really the two things that I go for.
Mm. That's awesome. I think describing that obsession, I don't know that I've necessarily heard someone explain it that way, but it makes so much sense. And I feel like a lot of people in the Right Hive community can probably relate to that. So what part of the writing process is the most challenging?
The the most I'm sorry, I'm laughing because like I think all of it is challenging in different stages. There's a difference between writing a book while you're under contract and a difference and writing a book when it's just you. There's no expectations, there's no agent, there's no editor, nobody's waiting for it. And so the challenges in that stage when you're pre-published is being able to find the time to write while I wrote my debut novel when I was going to college full time and I had a job full time, and I also worked nights, so it just made it I was writing whenever I had the chance, and so finding the time to write, that was the challenging part. Now I'm a full-time writer. I've been a full-time writer since 2016, and I've been making it by the skin of my teeth. Um, but I've been able to do it. And the difficulty in the writing process there is I have all this time, but everything else gets in the way, time management, production, all of the admin, blurb requests, like it's a different kind of tornado.
Mhm.
And so being able to settle into the story is also hard. And now that I'm on my like a dozen books, it also feels harder to not let the pressure get to me, right? So there's a pressure of, okay, this book has to be better than the last. This
Mhm.
book has to be different than all the other books, right? And so that there's different kinds of difficulties, and every book is going to be its own journey into figuring out what the story is. But it's interesting how 10 years ago I had a very like the same problem is like, well, when do I write? When do I actually have the time to write?
Mhm.
And so that becomes the hardest part of the writing process.
Very interesting. Thank you. So can you please walk us through your author journey and how you went from initially drafting to acquiring an agent to publishing?
Yes. So I've told you about how I was 13 when I got that assignment. When I was 15, 16, when I was 16 and in high school, I had a teacher, Mr. Johnson, who's my social studies teacher and African American studies teacher. He he signed me up for a writing program which was hosted by the National Book Foundation. And back in the day, the National Book Foundation had a writing camp where 50 to 60 people were accepted. I think it that or no, or I forget how many people, but it was like it was all ages from like 15 to 60. And I was one of those people, and I got to go 2 years, and so I learned everything I could about writing. There were teachers there who so I got to learn fiction from Jacqueline Woodson and poetry from Kamiko Han, and so there were these authors that I was like, my eyes were just wide open. getting this kind of instruction, right? And then they had mentors who, there was one counselor who was a nonfiction YA writer named Anne Angel. And she taught me what a query letter was and where to learn about query letters. So I had this like giant Writer's Digest agents and editors book, which comes out every year with updated information. And so I would just like flip through those pages. And obviously now there's better ways than in 2003. We had like just these giant tomes. Now there's a query tracker and all of those things. But so I basically learned about agents and publishing through Writer's Digest, Poets and Writers, Publishers Marketplace, and Publishers Weekly. And so I made sure I should have been doing, SAT prep, but I was like looking for agents. And because I had finished a book, I had finished a novel, it was 45,000 words. It didn't make any sense, but my query was on point. So I had agents responding to me, but the actual book wasn't good. I've read it since, and I'm like, oh yeah, a 16-year-old wrote this. Yes, I know. And so from there, I took that rejection and I was like, well, I'm going to learn more about the industry. So when I was in college, when I was 18, I got an internship at 2 literary agencies. Neither of them exist anymore, but one of them had been around for 30 years and one was like a startup. And so I met my agent, my first agent at that first agency. And I learned how the industry works. I learned what people were looking for. And she dared me to finish a book. I didn't think I wanted to write contemporary. But she was like, you should write this book, this idea that you've been talking about. And if you finish it, I'll represent it for you. And she was the agent's assistant. And she had just started looking for her own clients. And so I think I was her first client. I'm not sure. We took it out, got a lot of very lovely responses. And it was mostly like, this is really funny, but we already have a Latinx book this season, and it's like, okay. So, and that's also the first time I ever encountered the very coded, like racist publishing language, right? Like you're only allowed to have one Latinx contemporary YA romance, but you can have dozens of like small town girl goes and works at a, ice cream parlor and Kentucky or Nantucket, whatever. But I'm not bitter. I definitely went and looked at some of those rejections. And it's funny because like, I actually am working with one of those agents and neither of us remembered ever submitting like over a decade ago, which is to say, you just write the next story, you move on. I feel like I'm getting long-winded, but so after that, I was like very dramatic, 18, I'm never going to write again. Nobody loves my work. And I didn't write for a year. And I was walking around Barnes and Noble with a friend, an editor friend, who we used to just like go to the Barnes and Noble and look at the new releases. And I was like, I kind of want to read this kind of story, but I can't find it. And he was like, well, you should just write it. And I was like, well, I should just write it. And it feels like common sense, right? Like, oh, write the story that you want to see on the shelf. But I needed that push. I needed somebody to tell me. And so I wrote what would eventually become my debut novel, The Vicious Deep. It came out with Source Books in 2012. It is now out of print, but it is the story that really started my writing journey. I have since published a lot of books, and I'm on my 3rd literary agent and final literary agent. I feel like, 3rd time's the charm. And so that is my very long story of how I became a writer.
Awesome. No, that's what we want. Feel free to take all day with us. We love it. During that journey, you might have already touched on it, I think, a bit, but what was the most challenging part of that writing journey?
I think that understanding that the rejection isn't about you, even when it is about you, right? So like that very first rejection, like we already have a Latino book on our list, right? That is personal to me, right? You're taking my identity and saying like, okay, we can't have two people. But I know that it's also not about me. It's about racism that is embedded in the publishing industry because the mind is so in this little box that they just couldn't imagine how to make things work. And so it was my first lesson in understanding writing as a profession, as a business, and writing as a creative, passionate endeavor. And the two things are different and they should not live in the same house, but they do live side by side.
Mhm.
And so that separation was difficult and hurtful, but now I understand it helped me become a little bit more strategic in talking about my work, in um finding ways to be unapologetically myself and still having people come to the table and want something that I write. And so that understanding publishing as a business and publishing as like my art, that was very difficult.
So in the Red Hive community, a lot of our authors are in the process where they're at a crossroads, perhaps, and they're debating like, is my work something that I want to self-publish? Do I want to query maybe a traditional publishing path? Um, for you, like, what is something that you wish maybe you had known before you became a more traditionally published author?
I think um I don't know because I did my I feel like I did my due diligence. There is a very big difference between self-publishing and traditionally publishing. With self-publishing, it's sort of like you're your own startup, right? You need your own funds because you need to make a cover, you need to hire an editor. You're doing all of that front load. So like you're investing in yourself. And with a publisher, somebody else is investing in you. So you have a business partner. And so having that business partner is difficult because with any partnership, the person with the money is the person with the power, right? And the decision making, even though you're the content creator. So you technically have the power too, but like you're at almost the mercy of like, we hate this cover, like you personally hate a cover that your publisher loves, right?
Mm,
And so and because they think it'll do well in market.
mhm.
And this has happened to me several times and usually I'm right. But it's fine. Somebody will listen to me one day. And so that becomes like a difficult challenge. I wish I'd known how to advocate for myself more, right? And expressing when I'm unhappy in the moment as opposed to after the fact. No, like once you have an agent, your agent can be the bad guy. You don't have to complain to your editor yourself. It can come through this funnel. And so I think that part I wish I had learned a little bit sooner. I wish I had learned to cut ties with with partnerships that felt wrong from the very beginning. Like I feel like I I stayed in business partnerships that were perhaps dead in the water for 2 years before I decided like, okay, we need to cut ties. Like I can't work with you anymore. Because I didn't trust my instinct because I was trying to be nice.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I should, this is my business. I should prioritize it versus like you can find a way to have a business breakup without, things imploding. For instance, like firing an agent, the hardest decision I've ever had to make, but I knew I needed it in order to move forward with my career, right? Whereas in self-publishing, so much of it relies upon you. All of it relies upon you. So you have to do all of that legwork. And for some people, it really works out. And for others, it doesn't. And so that's the challenge that a publisher takes on you. But when you self-publish, you take it on yourself.
It's very valuable. Thank you very much. So what is the best part of your writing career so far?
I've had a lot. I've had a lot of high highs and low lows. Um, I think that the best part of my career so far has been able to talk to readers who are like, for instance, with Orquídea Divina, I have had more people reach out to me about this book than any other book I've written, right? And I think that that is something really, it's really special because the part about writing that is about connectivity isn't always a guarantee, right? Sometimes like we feel like we're writing into this void, and that's not always the case, right? Like we're writing on our own, but there's somebody at the other end of that line waiting for the story. And being able to talk to people and to hear like, oh, this is just like my family, even though we're not Latin. Like, this is just like, I feel like this character, this is just like my grandma, minus the turning yourself into a tree part. And so that has been the best part. Also, being able to go to Disney on like a VIP tour, that was really great. But
Okay.
but it's priorities. Some of it's just icing, and the other stuff is just like, oh, this is like my soul thing.
Right. Okay, awesome. Well, I definitely want to talk about the book, but before we do that, can you tell us about We Need Diverse Books and the mission?
Yeah, We Need Diverse Books is a nonprofit organization dedicated to making sure all kids have a wealth of books, specifically diverse books, because it's not only BIPOC and queer kids and disabled kids who need to read these books, it's everyone. And so We Need Diverse Books was started in 2014 through a viral hashtag when the buzz books at a book conference were all by white male authors. And a bunch of authors like got together and were like, this is not cool. And they did a really beautiful campaign that said, we need diverse books. And it eventually became a 501 nonprofit organization. It was completely grassroots. And we advocate for changes within the publishing industry to promote literature that reflects young people. We get books into classrooms. We have several grants, the Walter Grant, which gives money to aspiring authors. One of our recipients was Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate You Give. And she always tells the story how she took that money and she bought herself a laptop and she wrote The Hate You Give. And so it is something that is still growing, that is still accepting donations all the time. We make sure that like we put our money where our mouth is, like making sure that we diversify the industry so that people cannot just come into publishing, but stay in publishing.
So flipping gears a little bit, how did you become involved with writing a Star Wars story?
I want to say that it is the only good thing that has ever come to me from Twitter. I've never corroborated this, but when I remember it was like, I think it was 2016 or 2017, whatever, but I had a Poe Dameron thirst tweet, and it was something like, I want to write a book about Poe Dameron kissing his way through the galaxy, except I definitely didn't say kissing. And literally the next day, I get an email, my agent gets an email from Del Rey, one of the editors there, was like, we're putting together this anthology called From a Certain Point of View. And we hear Zoraida is a Star Wars fan. Would you be interested in XYZ? And so it was an anthology that was also a nonprofit anthology. So all of the proceeds went to charity, to First Book. And so it also was like a worthwhile endeavor while writing a Star Wars. And so then a year later, they reached out again and they asked if I wanted to write a love story set in the Star Wars universe, a YA love story set in Galaxy's Edge, which is now the new theme park. And I said, yep, absolutely. How much blood do you need? Do you want me to sign on the dotted line? And so that was my first original novel for them. And now I'm part of the High Republic Initiative, which is like an expanded storytelling initiative set 300 years in the past, before the events of A New Hope. Yeah, that's how I got started in it, and they haven't kicked me out yet. So
That's so cool. So I think you already mentioned that you definitely got into reading. What are some of your current reads if you have time?
some of my current reads, I read a really great book called The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. It's a kind of an origin myth of La Llorona, which is a Latin American legend about a weeping woman who drowns her children. And that book, this book, the legend has been retold a million times. Like a lot of gringos have made movies about it, whatever. I'm pretty sure it was like it's been an inspiration for so many things. But so this book, The Haunting of Alejandra, follows a woman's family line, and so how they have been haunted by this monster who claims to be La Llorona, and sort of steals the mothers from these families. And it is really beautifully told. There's a lot of history in there. I think it's a fascinating read, and it has a lot of body horror, so it's really great. I enjoyed it. I also loved the novella Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. It is Angels and Demons, just really straightforward fantasy. That was really wonderful. I'm trying to think of what else I've read this year. I read Hellbent by Lee Bardugo, which is book 2 in the Alex Stern trilogy, about occult secret societies at Yale. Also more angels and demons. And so I think those would be 3 books that I have really enjoyed lately.
So do you have any favorite tropes that you like to read or write?
I love a lot of different things. I love enemies to lovers when it's done well. And it's a slow burn. I love a quest. When you tell me, like, a quest and a road trip are very similar tropes and story structures. And so when you tell me that there's a quest here, I'm just like, great, let's go on this Odyssey. I think it's because the Odyssey is one of my favorite stories. And so I love being able to see, like, okay, we're going to different lands, we're going to meet all of these different creatures or all of these different things. And so once you tell me something has that, I'm into it. I love a secret twin. I love a surprise prince. There's just so much good stuff. I think that, like, a trope can always be made new with the right angle and with the right storyteller.
Agree. That's awesome. Well, I think we might have some suggestions here that we can add for everyone attending the conference. If you want to put some suggestions in chat, we'd love to have them. And now I'd like to talk to you about your book, The Inheritance. And I think I'm saying it wrong. Is it Orquídea or Orquídea?
Orquídea.
Orquídea. I was definitely saying it wrong. I loved this story, so I am trying not to fangirl too much about these questions, but I would love to pick your brain about it if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the story takes place, parts of it in your home city, right, in Ecuador. So what was sort of the inspiration for the story? Did it come from Ecuador, or just maybe like a creative brainwave that you had one day?
The story was originally a short story. It was called Divine Are the Stars, and it was in the anthology Toil and Trouble. which was edited by Tess Sharp. Oh my God. And Jessica Spotswood. And so the anthology was about women in witchcraft and magic. And so I had this recurring image of a grandmother who turns herself into a tree. And so I started with that image, and then I zoomed out and I figured, okay, like, what's happening here? Where is this house? Why this house? Where did these people come from? And so that short story was published in, I think, 2017. 2017 was a year. And I'm trying to think of the sequence of events. Around the same time, an editor approached us from the publisher Atria, because we had been I'd had a romance series at another publisher, and the editor was like, you should submit to this, you should talk to this editor because she's looking for the kind of things that you write. And so we did pitch to the editor 2 different ideas, and she liked the short story retelling more, because I said this is how I would expand the short story into a novel. Then the editor left to become she went back to agenting a year later, and the book still wasn't done. So by that time I had a new editor, and we were just trying to figure out like how it would work. And so I just focused on the character, and I focused on the scene. And I kept asking myself, like, okay, so if I'm zooming out of this scene, what does it look like? What does this family look like? And to be very honest, the Ecuador scenes were not there in the first draft. It all took place in the States, and in that town, but it felt a little anticlimactic. And so with every revision, I kept adding things. So then I added them returning to Ecuador in the second half, and going on a quest to figure out their grandmother's origins and what made their grandmother the way she is. And for those of you who don't know what this book is about, it's multi-generational family story about a woman who gives an inheritance to 3 of her descendants, and they have to uncover the secrets of her past. And so that was sort of the short story was the seed for everything else. And it is an interesting exercise turning a short story into a novel, because there's, it isn't a continuation. I couldn't just take the short story and copy and paste. I had to just cut out very specific paragraphs, very specific things that I needed to be in the story. And then everything else was just like, I had to start from scratch, even some names. So that became a whole other thing where I'm like, okay, I have to let the short story go. It's not canon in the world of Orquídea Divina anymore, but it is where it started.
Interesting. What real life elements are loosely embedded in the narrative?
Well, it is a story set in my hometown of Guayaquil. It's the town, when they go to Ecuador, that is my town. That's where I was born and raised, La Tarazana. When I was a kid, my uncle used to tell me stories about like an alligator in the river, which was right alongside of the place where our neighborhood, and how he got almost eaten by an alligator, and he had this like scar on his belly. And so it wasn't true. He was always yanking my leg, but I took that story and I fictionalized it, and I made a real monster in that river. And so parts of it are inspired by my family, but all of it is original, like all original stuff that I made up.
So the story, it intermingles the grandmother's story from when she was young with the story of her grandchildren in the present day. And the shuffling of those interconnected stories it was really able to push the narrative forward in a really masterful way. So how did you work through that order and timing?
That was very difficult because the scenes, there are flashback scenes.
Mhm.
Those weren't in the first or even second draft. We were about to go into copy edits, and I was still feeling like this isn't work. Something is missing, and I knew it, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I had a call with a friend, and she was like, "I just read it. Do you still? I know you're about to go to copy edits. Do you still want comments?" And I was like, "Sure." And she was like, "Okay, this is what I think that I need from the story." And it was like all the past scenes. And so I called my editor. I texted my editor, and I was like, "Don't kill me. Stop the presses. I have an idea. I need another month and I'll get it done." And it completely changed the story by adding those past flashbacks of what we
Mhm.
needed to see from a woman like Orquídea. And it almost like it made me remember one of like the tentpole rules of fiction that I keep, which is from Kurt Vonnegut, which is one of the rules, one of his writing rules is like your reader should never be confused, right, about what's happening. And I think that as
Mhm.
writers, we try to like be mysterious and not let the reader guess, and there are ways to like drop things in and still have twists. But
Mhm.
like I think that I was letting I wanted it to be it was almost too cloaked in shadow, and I needed a little bit more of that light. And that came from those alternating chapters.
I think what I really enjoyed about those chapters too is that even though that history that was taking place in the past has obviously already been said and done, it really did impact the present day story and it gave it more flavor. But it wasn't like it still gave momentum to the current day story and it drove it forward in a really great way. So that was really beautiful. Aside from Orquídea, her descendants were given magical manifestations that grow from their skin. How did you decide among the grandchildren who should be highlighted? And how did you outline their personalities and characteristics so well?
Well, I knew that I wanted the characters that she gives magical inheritances to be sort of the outcasts of the family. Yeah, so I wanted them to represent uh the new generation. And
Mhm.
then once I started writing, I did an outline for this book as much as I do for other books, and I'm not really sure why. I think that I just really wanted to get in there, and I don't usually do exploratory writing where I'm just like, okay, this character is walking through the city. What do they see? But for Marimar, for Ray, and for Rhiannon, I felt like I needed that. And so I try to study their characters, figure out, okay, Ray's an artist. What does he do? What does he want? How does the magic affect his creativity? How does Marimar deal with her solitude and isolation and loneliness?
Mhm.
And how does her power affect all of that? She goes into this hibernation um, of like sleeping for a very, very long time, right? And
Yeah.
so and with Rhiannon, the little girl, uh she represents that distance between generations of like, once you come to this country, once you immigrate, you sort of start becoming something else, right? Like, is the third generation still Ecuadorian, or are they fully American? And I
Mhm.
think that that's something that a lot of immigrant kids and people that have been here for a long time ask themselves. And it's because it's not an identity crisis. Like, they always know who they are. It's
Mhm.
more of like understanding the past so that you can better um have a way forward with who you are, and um the things that you have been given, right?
Mhm. And I think that's really relatable to a lot of families, children of immigrants, etc. In fact, the person who recommended your book to me is one, and I think that feeling really connected with her and was one of the reasons why she loved it so much. So you're the only person who knows their future. Is there a world where Orchidea's grandchildren find love? Do you think Marima gets a second chance with her father? Like, can you give us some spoilers that we'll never know?
And I left everyone at a happily ever after. Like everyone's together, but even I don't know what comes after for them after that. But I this is like my happiest ending.
Mm. So the story came out in 2021. Have there been any questions or reader takes on your story that kind of took you by surprise?
No, I mean, I don't really, it is actually the only thing, because I don't go and search and look. I think like when people tell me, like, I do read my, reader emails, but I don't look for reviews. But the one thing that has been actually surprising was like when Encanto came out and people started pitching Orquídea Divina as like an adult Encanto, because it has a magical house and a very diverse Latin family, and Ecuador and Colombia are like this. So it is that was actually surprising, because like obviously this book, I started writing it in 2017 and it took 4 years for it to come out. So it was, and then a year later when the paperback was coming out, it was like adult, which I don't mind. I think
Mhm.
it's really cute. But that was really surprising, that if you read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, she talks about big magic as something like being in the air. So like at the same time that you're writing this thing, someone in the other side of the world or like next door might be writing something very similar. And so we're just like creativity is just all in this space and we're all connected through it. And so like it was kind of awesome. That has been a really interesting take. But other than that, I don't really read reviews, and but I have enjoyed the comments that people send me about how they've connected to the story.
Well, definitely well deserved.
Thank you.
So Right Hive is a nonprofit dedicating to helping authors pursue their dream. What mentoring advice would you give to authors who might like to follow in your footsteps?
I think that my biggest advice to read to write to aspiring writers is always to read everything. I think that you learn the kind of writer you want to be through a process of elimination. I also think that when you do that, when you sort of like absorb all of these other stories, you figure out your own voice. I feel like I have learned, I started off at a very small publisher and have like very, very slowly chipped away. And so my journey has been very long and difficult. And I feel like I'm only just making headway into the kind of writer that I want to be. And it's been a decade. It's actually been more than a decade. It's 2023. It's been 11 years. My debut book came out 11 years ago in a week. In a week, it'll be 11 years. And so learning how to have that kind of patience to know that not every success is an overnight success. Not every failure is indicative of the quality of writing that you have. Sometimes there's things out of your control. So coming to grips with all of that has made me navigate publishing in a different way, in a way that I feel like also preserves my sanity and my creativity. Because when I didn't have that, when I had the wrong representatives, when I had the wrong deals, the wrong publishers, I felt like I wanted to quit every single day. And now I just want to keep going because I know the only way is to just write the next book and to write the best book that I can in that moment, because you're always going to become a better writer. But you can't focus on the future and you can't focus on the past. So it's just like, this is the time you have, so use it wisely.
So Right Hive's tagline is writing the future we need. What does that look like to you?
I think it means having a more inclusive pool of writers. I think that there's still stories that we haven't been able to see. I want to see more high fantasy from non-Western perspectives. I think that like writing the future is showing the world as it is. And I think that like we're all limitless, right? Like there's no limit to the things that we can do. We just actually have to do it. And so I think that that's what it means. That's what I would take away from that.
Thank you. That's great. So we're getting to our last question. I hope you're all adding your questions in our chat. Zoraida, can you give us a sneak peek by letting us know what are you working on now and how soon can we read it?
I have a book coming out August 1st, 2023 called Kiss the Girl. It's part of a series of standalones by Disney Books. Hyperion Lane or Hyperion Avenue is their adult publisher, adult imprint. And it's a contemporary retellings of the Disney princesses as modern zillennial girls. And so mine is The Little Mermaid. And it's in my iteration, Ariel is a pop princess, pop star. Her father is the CEO of Atlantica Records. And she, after a very big fight and missing an interview, she runs away with a young indie rock budding star named Eric Reyes. And so the two, like, she joins their tour undercover as a normal girl. And so it has all my favorite romance tropes, and they go on a tour road trip basically. So that's what's coming up next. I know it's a little weird, like it's going from all this like fantasy and magic and then going into this contemporary novel, but The Little Mermaid is part of my origin story. I remember when I was a kid, my grandmother sent me a VHS of The Little Mermaid and I watched it over and over again, like the agony of having to rewind a VHS and wait like 2 minutes. Like no one will ever know that impatience. And so and I feel like that's how I learned how to speak English, because by the time I was in school, I went to a bilingual school in Ecuador. By the time I went there, I could already speak it, but it was all just like lines from The Little Mermaid. And so after that, I have a lot of anthologies. I'm the editor of several anthologies with my co-editor, Natalie C. Parker. We have an anthology called Mermaids Never Drown, which is a companion to our anthology Vampires Never Get Old. Vampires Never Get Old is coming out in paperback September 26th. Mermaids Never Drown is coming out for the first time in hardcover in also September 26th. I'm working on my next adult. It's my follow-up after Orquídea Divina. And it's called The Fall of Rebel Angels. And it is about an angel in Lucifer's army who fell along with all the others. And his punishment is that he has lost his wings and he's falling for eternity. But every 100 years, he lands on Earth and he has 7 days to find his wings. And this time he lands in modern times, and he comes across a woman who is under investigation for the disappearance of her possible murder of her ex-boyfriend. And so the two of them are sort of, their fates are entwined, and they have to find out where the body is and where his wings are. So it is a very strange book, but I have loved every second of writing it. And I feel like, we got to bring angels and romance back.
I think it's time. You're right. Absolutely. And I can only already see everyone in chat doing the gimme hands. So I think we're going to be excited to read those. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. To all of our Right Hive 2023 attendees. If you have any questions for Zoraida, please drop them in chat. We'll stick around a little bit longer and make sure we answer them. And then to find Zoraida, you can visit her website at zoraidacordova.com or on Twitter at Z like in Zoro, and on Instagram at Zoraida Solo. I hope you enjoyed our panel. Zoraida, are there any other final words you'd like to share?
No, just go write your books.
All right, you heard her. On behalf of Right Hive, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you on the Discord.